All right, ladies and gentlemen, call this meeting order today for our January 23rd, 2025 special call meeting. Welcome everybody here that's in the courtroom tonight, anybody that's online. Our first order today on our agenda would be to convene into a closed meeting. And Mr. Tad, like you have some language for us?
Yes, sir. You ready for that motion? Need a motion that the Northumberland County Board of Supervisors convene in closed meeting pursuant to Virginia Freedom of Information Act, Section 2.2, 3711A3, for the discussion or consideration of the potential acquisition of real property for a public purpose or the potential disposition of publicly held real property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the board's bargaining position or negotiating strategy. Section 2.2, 3711A7, for consultation with legal counsel and/or staff pertaining to specific legal matters where such consultation or briefing in open meeting would adversely affect the board's negotiating or litigating posture. And Section 2.2, 3711A8, for consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring this provision of legal advice by such counsel. Invited to attend the closed meeting as necessary are the county administrator, county attorney who will be joining by phone, and assistant county administrator because they are deemed necessary, and their presence will reasonably aid the board in its consideration of the topics to be discussed pursuant to Virginia FOIA Section 2.2, 3712F.
All right, can I have a motion? Go into closed meeting?
Motion to approve.
Second. Got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are now in closed meeting, and we will go to the adjoining courtroom. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll call this meeting back to order. I will need a motion to come out of closed meeting.
Need a motion that the Northumberland Board of Supervisors return to public meeting and certify by roll call vote that only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements by the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered during the closed meeting.
All right, can I have a motion?
Motion made.
I'll second it. We've got a motion and a second. Roll call vote. Mr. Williams? Aye. Mr. Long? Aye. Mr. Brand?
Aye.
Mr. Fisher?
Aye.
Mr. Haney? Aye. Ladies and gentlemen, we are back in an open meeting now. Sorry it took us a little bit longer, but we are ready for our presentation tonight. We have UHY advisors here. We have Mr. Jack Regan and Ms. Heaveness. You'll come on up, have a seat, or whatever y'all want to do is fine. Good to see y'all today.
Good to see you. Everyone staying warm?
Yep, staying warm some kind of way.
Thanks for having us down again. Appreciate the opportunity to talk about our report again. We can go on to the next slide. We sent it over a little bit earlier. So we'll re-highlight the scope of the review, what we did, and some of our observations. And then we wanted to blow out the appendix to give charts and graphs and things like that can provide some additional color commentary to the report. To refresh everybody's recollections, we were engaged on the next slide. We were looking specifically 2019 through 2023, looking at payroll time and attendance, policies and procedures, your procurement activities, your accounts payable activities, looking at the purchasing cards activity, and then getting finally, after we were over on the expenditure side so long, we're like, you know what, we'll go over and do some revenue stuff too. And looking at overall revenue management, treasury management, because at all local governments. The lifeblood of the organization really is through getting the bank statements reconciled monthly, and we wanted to make sure that everything was getting through the bank statements and wanted to make sure we covered that. So that's what treasury management is. 4 phases. We came out, we planned, got an understanding of the environment both at the county and at the schools. We looked at the design and implementation of controls. So how did a transaction move from point A to point B to point C in those areas that we highlighted on the prior slide. We drew a fairly healthy sample of transactions in each of those program areas to look at whether or not there was sufficient supporting documentation to support the books and records of the items that were recorded. If we needed to expand our testing, we did so, and then finally we developed the report that you have in front of you. We communicated on a regular basis with both county staff and school board staff. Had several meetings with those charged with governance here, presented a couple of different drafts of the report, and have the final report that you see in front of you now. Our goal in the report was to, at the end of the day, provide you with recommendations to address the findings in the report that were both practical and actionable. And I know you don't usually get that from a lot of consulting reports, but that is what I was hoping to achieve with the recommendations that we had coming out of the report. Some of the observations that we identified are as follows. As is typical at a lot of governments, we identified that there were a lot of, in the top 2 bullets there, the succession planning and segregation of duties. It's a small county. You have people who have been here for a long time doing their jobs very conscientiously, and if they get hit by a snowplow, you're in trouble. You know, instead of the bus, it's a snowplow, given what we had this week. So, you know, that goes to issues of succession planning, segregation of duties. So many instances, you've got the way that stuff is done is up here between someone's ears and not in a written policies and procedures document that is current, that you know, someone, if that person becomes incapacitated or otherwise unable to do their job, someone else could follow in and do that job. We also observed that for some of the key oversight, and I think here we were talking about some of the work in the treasurer's office, but there's statutory responsibilities around that where, you know, no one can really oversee because there are legal responsibilities there. But from an accounting standpoint, you still need some oversight. Someone needs to be setting eyes on those things, even though that constitutional office can initiate, process, record all the transactions. Folks who are the recipients of monthly reports, quarterly reports, and such can review them to see that things are still being done. So that's all what we mean by oversight there, or the cadence of these monthly reports that are run need to have some better oversight. We did notice a before and after. You know, there were some changes at schools in personnel in and around fiscal year 23 that have resulted in improved quality of information and improved timeliness of information. So there is a marked contrast in a lot of the findings and observations you see about unavailable information really do pertain to a period prior to 2023. So, I can't emphasize enough, there is a gulf, there is a difference between stuff we found and the quality of the information pre-fiscal year 23 and post-fiscal year 23. The other thing that we did identify is that there are certain automated controls in both IT systems that are there that could prevent overspending, that could prevent a transaction that should not be processed from happening. But those controls don't shut off the transaction from happening until something else happens. They're warning screens, they can be clicked on and overridden, and they're done. So, for us, as we get into the themes, you can almost paint the picture of, all right, here are the global issues that we're seeing, and you should be able to see the recommendations that are coming down from that. One of the key process, or one of the key recommendations that we've got, and we broke them down between the work that we did out at schools and the recommendations we have for improving their processes, and then a separate one for county. But what we wanted to see was, after the initial budget is appropriated, we want to see that there is a reconciliation done to show how that is loaded into the system at the level of appropriated authority that has been granted by this board. And that reconciliation needs to be driven down through the general ledger accounts, but further, and this is, again, a common practice, unfortunately, at other governments around the country that we've seen as well, that a lot of times for monies that may have, we'll call them entitlement grants, we'll call them sort of new grants, and ESSER is the one that comes to mind, that ESSER money, all of the funds of the schools should be included in budget information, should be presented in everything, and that there shouldn't be stuff that is presented through, everything should be presented through the operating budget. I mean, that's just good, sound business practice. And then once you're appropriating this annual budget by category, you need to monitor the budget to make sure that it's being appropriated or it's being managed by that category, and to demonstrate compliance with the way that you have given them the money. And that report should be presented on a monthly basis to the schools, and then that way you've got access to it as well, to the school board. You should have some sort of succession planning document that's out there to how you're going to transition someone's roles, responsibilities, should they choose to retire or otherwise become incapacitated, to facilitate that knowledge transfer. It's very important, given the size of the county, as you design these policies and procedures, if you see someone who, for no other reason other than the size of the county, has incompatible duties, so may they initiate, process, record a transaction, that if that happens, proper documentation exists to show that that information was reviewed by another person. So that, again, can mean that the presentation of information that is processed by the treasurer or CFO is presented to the county administrator or the superintendent of schools with a copy to the chair of the board so that someone else is setting eyes on those things that someone who has incompatible duties has prepared. You know, we felt it necessary to put in record retention as a recommendation, only because there were so many documents that were unable to be located for several of the older fiscal years. Again, that's why we tried to paint the picture of before 23 and after 23, that there are definitely improvements in the quality of the record retention in fiscal year 23 and later, but we wanted to make sure that everyone was paying attention and recognized the importance of those record retention policies. And then the enforcement of the policies and procedures, that one is really getting at some of these automated controls that exist over expenditure amounts, and making sure that if a transaction will result in an over expenditure at the categorical level, which is where the county has appropriated the budget, that transaction is stopped. It's not initiated until there is an appropriate budget modification made to create sufficient budgetary authority to process that transaction. So that's a real, enforcing the policies and procedures. That's critical. On the county side, same story for several of these: the succession planning, the documentation of policies and procedures, the documentation of segregation of duties. That's sort of a common theme. Again, it's not unusual to see that in a county of this size. It's not something that I find unusual, but there are compensating controls that you can implement to ensure that you overcome those segregation of duties issues through enhanced oversight mechanisms. So that is making sure that you get, if I'm sitting up on the dais, I would be asking the question every month: are all of our bank reconciliations current? Do we have any significant unprocessed transactions that are not reflected in the monthly budget to actual report that you've given me for revenues and expenditures? I think if you ask those questions, that will significantly enhance the quality and the timeliness of the financial data that this board gets to exercise its fiduciary oversight of the county operations. The old saw when I first came into the business 36 years ago was what gets measured gets done. Governments measure a whole lot of things. I don't think we have a measurement problem. I think we have a monitoring problem. What gets monitored gets done. The fact that folks are asking questions ensures that stuff that should be getting done gets done on a timely basis. And again, just enhancing those oversight mechanisms should definitely improve the quality and the timeliness of the financial and non-financial data that you get to exercise your fiduciary responsibilities. What'd I miss, Heather?
Not a whole lot, but we figured we'd have questions. What we have in the appendix is all the details behind the numbers and the recommendations and the responses that were in the report, but rather than go through them here, I think we will take questions.
And again, we thank the board for its time.
All right. Excuse me. Any board members have any questions? Whoever wants to start it off.
the risk assessment, what is the basic difference between uncontrolled and unidentified activities?
There are activities that we viewed that seemed, that we could see, right? So if you notice, there was a big statement in the report that, prior to the state, we could not get documentation. So those, before I even answer, can you tell me what page you're looking at? Because I want to make sure I'm answering this correctly. I've got it up.
I think the third one up there, if I'm not mistaken.
What is it?
I think it was.
I just want to make sure I'm answering correctly. I think what you're getting at is the fact that before the documentation existed, we could not identify items because there was no documentation in which to identify. That is different than when we found activities that were just not fully locked down and controlled. So they're slightly different, but I want to make sure I'm answering that correctly based on the origin of the question.
And you weren't able to find the activity?
Yes. So in some cases with schools, and there was a big note about this, and there's a recommendation regarding documentation and following proper documentation, excuse me.
Yeah, we touched on that a little bit when you were here before.
When we were here last, right? We talked about how the record keeping and record retention, which is the word I was searching for, was not appropriate for 2019 to 2022. So we were basically provided, let's call it 5 to 10 boxes of financial records, which is basically like the way you would keep your memories. They weren't organized or anything. So we went spelunking through those documentations, but we can't use a proper control structure because if we don't understand the appropriate sample size from which to select from, we don't even know what we're looking for, right? And at that point, we actually came back to the board and said, listen, we can opine partially, but we cannot opine fully if we don't have 100% of the control sample. So we can only do part of that work.
Yeah, we
Now,
could see a transaction that was recorded in the ledger,
but we can't see the
but we
evidence
can't
for it.
find the documentation to support the transaction that was recorded in the ledger. The documentation was missing.
Oh, you've never got it?
No. No, and that's, I think when Jack started speaking, he said that there was a marked, I think the word you used was gulf in difference between prior to fiscal year 23 and after 23 due to an individual that was hired with better bookkeeping practices. And then we were able to get, at least test that sample control population, right? So we were able to pull in and say, hey, listen, we're going to select 50 samples, and we were able to find a great majority of that documentation. We could have been spelunking through those boxes forever and still not find not even 60% of it. So that's why you see that difference.
Okay, thank you.
And once you know you're not going to find close to 100%, yeah, call it.
At what point through the auditing process did you determine that you weren't going to come up with that documentation?
I mean, that was my call as I sent my team back through the boxes for a second and third time. It's almost 2 or 3 times that we went through the box searching for that documentation, shoveled it back here, asked for folks on staff to take a look. I believe we even did, and they were unable to locate. So we made a call after that it just wasn't going to be cost effective anymore to try and.
We spent multiple months trying to look for things.
Is it customary to notify the county that's hired you on to do this audit
Yeah, we did.
at that point when that happens?
Yeah, and that's what was done, yeah.
So-
Yeah, 'cause it's a decision we have to make together. If you had said, no, keep looking, we would have kept looking.
So you noticed more of that in 2019, 2020, 2021.
In 2022.
So that's what concerns me a little, because basically your audit was, the information that you used to conduct your audit was based mainly on 23. So you were not able to really conduct your audit on the past years that really would have made a huge difference because you could not get all the documentation.
We could not get to all the documentation in 19, 20, 21, and 22.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that's reflected in the report.
It is, and I guess one
For
thing that
schools,
keeps,
I want to be clear, for schools, county and treasurer.
right, and I guess what
That's
jumps out
good
at me,
clarification.
and is your audit finding summaries that we determined the lack of documentation limits the scope of our audit test design to identify fraud, waste, and abuse of funds. And I guess what, like I said, sticks in my mind is that we got an audit, but the audit, and I'm not meaning to sound bad when I say this, but to me, the audit is flawed because it does not have all the documentation to make it solid.
I don't know that the procedures that we've done are flawed, because, you know, the test was to try and find the supporting documentation.
Right.
The supporting documentation existed. Did it support the transaction that was initiated, processed, and recorded? We stopped when we couldn't find the documentation. That in and of itself is a finding.
Right, okay. So it's considered a finding, but it doesn't really help your facts and numbers.
Well, so I will say, and if I may.
Yeah, absolutely.
With any audit, right, and I'm going to just backtrack just a little bit, we have what's called a test of design and a test of operating effectiveness, right? Test of design is the control working? It's a test of one, where you can follow it through. Test of operating effectiveness is it working repeatedly, right? So historically, what happens is we look for one, we prove out that control is working, and then we sample from that, and we look, let's say we sample 50, and we look for whatever percentage of that population, and whatever falls out from that falls out. In a lot of cases here, we had to work to identify what that test of design is because of the lack of documentation. I will say, in a lot of cases, when I'm looking at jurisdictions and there's no policies and procedures, we kind of just call it, right? There's no policies and procedures, there's no controls. We didn't here. We did still do the interviews. We did still look in the systems. We did still apply, auditor's judgment to taking a look at that to see, and asked a lot of questions when things were a little bit outside of what would be considered normal in our opinion. But at the end of the day, we can't say for a $5,000 Amazon bill that they spent it ordering. I can't guarantee that 5 computers were ordered. That was, of course, a terrible example because we could find the Amazon stuff. But I cannot guarantee that that's exactly what was ordered. But I can guarantee. Because the documentation wasn't there, right? But I can say that we did look at the numbers, we did test a reasonableness, we did look at the policies and procedures and control structure, and that is what fed the recommendations here. There were a number of firms that would have gone through and been like, no policies and procedures, no testing.
With your process and your control, and not being able to have all the documentation to support everything, what percent of error, one way or the other, is there? What possibly could be there?
That's the art that's out there, but I will tell you that, so we've got you've got 3 different classifications of control weaknesses. You have a deficiency, you have a significant deficiency, you have a material weakness, okay? Material weakness is basically the controls that are in place won't prevent or detect a material error in that number, in that account. There is nothing in the professional literature that is going to support these numbers that I'm going to give you, but I'm going to give them to you anyway.
That's fine.
Okay, because it goes to a matter of auditor judgment. And some of the rule of thumb that I've followed is if I've got a greater than a 10% error rate, that's material weakness. If I've got 5 to 10% error rate, that's my mushy middle. Then I'm between, I'm around a significant deficiency, but I could tilt towards a material weakness. It's got to be below 5%, but still above 0 for it to be a deficiency. That will vary from auditor to auditor. That will vary from professional to professional that does this for a living. I would say in the government sphere, the governments that I've worked in that are in the fishbowl, I tend to be a little bit more conservative. You might have other auditors that are willing to live with a little bit higher percentages than those. So I've just got a little bit of jerk in me that it has a much narrower band than that. And as Heather said, you know, most of the time on these audits, once I would hit that 10% threshold, I'd kind of stop, because then I know the control's busted. It doesn't make any sense to keep going and going and going. That's just wasting taxpayer money to do that. Let's move on and try and do some of the other substantive tests that are out there to substantiate the balances, because the other way that you do this is, once you know the controls fail, you'd have to draw a larger sample to see if the numbers are okay. But here, because we couldn't get the supporting documentation, and we knew we couldn't get the supporting documentation, it didn't make any sense to even expand the test to do more work, because there was no way to be able to identify that supporting documentation to conclude that test. But that, again, is period 19 through 22. 23 and later is better, but it's definitely, there are improvements that can be made. There are certainly improvements that can be made even post 23. AICPA is probably going to shoot me for saying the 0510 rule of mine, but I'll deal with that fallout. I knew the board wasn't going to let me get away with anything less.
Mr. Reagan, just to be completely clear, you said that there was some documentation that you could not get to pertaining to the school system. You couldn't get to, does that mean it was there that you didn't have access to it, or it just was not there, just to be completely clear?
Was not there. Well,
Wasn't
we
findable.
could not, it wasn't findable. The records for those years were in such disarray, it couldn't be located in one pass or two, so we don't know if it was unlocated or unavailable.
Let me just paint a little picture here, right? So we had, at one point, the records were in multiple boxes taking up, we pulled them from the basement of schools. We brought them north where we could sort of live with them and search through them. I'm going to say there were probably minimum 10 boxes.
10 bankers boxes.
Yes, with no, it's not like they had file folders separating things or anything, that are all random. So we tried to go through and sort of categorize what was in those boxes, so at least we knew what pile to look for when we were looking for something. But,
The best
10
analogy.
boxes.
The best analogy is, any of your kids have a big tub of Legos? We were trying to go in and find one double
hat that
six
goes on the head.
red brick. Right? At some point, you just, after you make a pass or two where you put your hands on literally every document in the box, and you don't see it, you make a call that it's not worth it to continue.
But also, when schools provided us those boxes, they didn't even understand that, like, there were more boxes underneath there. We don't even know that they gave us all the boxes. They just were like, we don't even know that we had the entire population. So we should have
That's a
been
good
looking for
point.
something that may still have been under schools.
The presumption that you're
Ask you.
making.
What was that?
Hold on just one second. That's what I was going to ask you. Had you been given all the material, or were you just given X amount?
So at the end of the day, the burden of proof is on the schools, right? We ask for the documentation, and we do everything we can to go through what is provided for us. But the representative from schools, whose name I unfortunately cannot remember, was new as of 2023, which is what Tara, thank you, was new as of 2023. She had just taken on, she herself was trying to get her hands around everything that had been done before she got there. And, she was sort of like, hey, I don't know where it is. There's stuff under here that's in a bunch of boxes. Here you go. There was, speaking to our early discussion around succession planning, there was not any succession planning that really had been done around that particular role, and not really transfer of duties that had happened. So she started net new, in 2023, and tried to rebuild what she could and put in policies and procedures. But, again, she only knew what she knew.
And made an appropriate call, in my opinion, You focus on trying to clean up all those old records, you work on maintaining the current records. And she made the value judgment
Yes.
to spend her time making sure that current records were maintained, and that gobbled up all the time.
Yeah,
It's probably impossible for her to go back and
correct.
Yeah.
clean up
It-
everything.
It
that-
Probably almost
it would be
impossible.
hard. Did you like the Lego analogy?
Yeah.
I thought that was
I got
pretty
that
good.
one.
I also see where you made a statement here about fixed assets that the board approvals onto it were not attained. So I guess basically what you're saying there is that the school board never signed off onto purchasing these fixed assets.
Which page is that one on?
So that's
31,
regarding- yeah,
30, 31.
Hold on, let me just get you down there. Here we go. Controls around fixed assets appear to be reinfected. That's correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the board policy was purchases over X dollars should have been brought to the board for approval.
And they weren't.
And they weren't.
Yes.
And then you have up here on purchase orders. Purchase orders were not obtained. They didn't have the appropriate signatures, or else payments were paid. That's on page 30.
Thank you.
Or else payments were made without a purchase order.
Yep.
It seems to me it's a whole lot of things that were done down there. I mean, just reading through this, seems to me it's a whole lot of things were done down there that are just not up to par. You know,
So,
you don't pay something without a invoice, purchase order, what do you want to call it? I just don't write you a check for something without an invoice for it.
So the whole purpose of a budget is to, that is the ultimate level of control. You apportion that budget authority out through the purchase orders. Then when you issue the purchase orders, you get the invoices that come in,
Yes, that's right.
right? In certain instances, there are goods there are goods. You generally would have a receiving report that you would match against that invoice, that would match against the purchase order. I mean, that's the way that a purchase order system should work. Many of the services that, and again, this is not justifying anything, but what ends up happening is so many times what's being purchased is a service, not necessarily good, but a service. So since I don't really get a receiving report, there's nothing for me to match it against, so I won't cut a purchase order. That doesn't make any sense to me. You can write a memo that says, I actually
Yes.
received this service, hugs and kisses, Jack,
Yes.
right? And that can be the support for the purchase order that is in lieu of the receiving report for services that are rendered. That's a fairly common and easy way to do that. But, once you have the budget, you go to the purchase order, and the purchase order helps control all that spending. So if you miss that, and you just get the invoice that comes in, your accounting system for your budget is never fully encumbered to show that those dollars have really been spoken for that 15, 30, 60-day window, whatever, from the legal time that you have that obligation to the point that you pay the invoice. So as soon as you make that commitment to buy, you should have a purchase order that encumbers those funds. That way, no one can spend those funds except for the person that's got that purchase order.
and they have a cap for the funds they can spend.
Yep. So that's,
Yes.
and so
That's right. You
there are
have to have
written
a cap.
policies out there that say that that's supposed to be done, and it's not being consistently done. And that goes to Heather's discussion, when we talked about the design, right? We could see, and when we walked through the transaction, we could see that there was, in fact, a purchase order system in place, right? So, yes, the design of the control appears appropriate, but they're not following it 100% of the time. That goes to the operating effectiveness. That means, you relentlessly execute those policies and procedures. You do the same thing again and again and again. If you've got a purchase, you've got to cut a purchase order. you got to get an invoice. You got to have some sort of receipt and acceptance in order to generate the approval for payment.
And I will say, I think in '23, they put the RDA functioning for the electronic purchase orders in, but even when there's a manual process, and this is how we get to the segregation of duties piece that we got in the themes here. If there's a manual process, you shouldn't have just one person touching it. You need to have a second person reviewing it and making sure that that process is consistent over and over and over again. And without that secondary touch, it's really where you see these kinds of mistakes. Because what ends up happening is, Heather Nuss is, cutting the purchase order, but Heather Nuss has already received on the same 5 pencils every month, and they say, oh yeah, we expect the 5 pencils, and we know that this is fine, so they just sort of get lazier and lazier with every passing month because it becomes regular and routine. And there's no one that's sort of keeping them honest to make sure that if those pencils end up being 6 pencils, or they end up going from $1 a piece to $1.50 a piece, there's none of that sort of rigor.
And to your point, Mr. Chair, the rigor at which you relentlessly apply those controls directly impacts the quality of that budget information that gets presented. Failing to generate that purchase order, understates the amount of budget that has been charged as of that point in time. It gets made up at the end once you cut the check, because then the budget is relieved finally. But, the whole point of the purchase order system is to show in the budget that money's been spoken for, so that you don't have 2, 3, 4 people at the same time trying to claim that same dollar. And it gets really difficult as you get closer and closer to the budget margin, until you get to that budgeted cap that you guys have done in more recent years at the category level and not at the total expenditures level.
Yeah.
But then also, the controls also help correct the negative amounts in the categories.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's
So
talk about that.
it should help identify when that happens.
Right.
Because someone who wants to purchase something should come and say, I need $50,000 of budget authority, please, and it's got to go here. And then the person who is entering that enters the $50,000. There was only $40,000 of budgetary authority left. So at that point in time, before you've entered into the contract, before you've entered into the purchase, you should be saying, I have not sufficient budget authority to do that. So then you either do not do you can't do the purchase, but then you decide whether you are going to do the purchase. If you are going to do the purchase, before you sign it, you have to go and get budgetary authority sufficient to do that. That's the whole point of of a purchase order system, and that's the whole point of loading the budget at that categorical level. It was very clear to us in our discussions with school personnel that they were managing their budget to the total appropriation level, not to the categorical level in any year that was under the procedures that we did.
And
What
that
did they do to
process
make you
hasn't
believe that?
changed.
Why did you come to that determination?
They would say,
They
what
said
does
it.
it matter?
They
The
said it.
total,
They
we
said
never
it.
went over it. Yeah, we would say, hey, you
But we didn't
overspent by X
exceed
dollar.
We didn't exceed
Well,
the
we
total
didn't exceed the
appropriation.
total vote. What does it matter?
So let's dig this a little deeper. So let's say a purchase goes through. It overdraws an account by 100,000. There's still controls that the county has, or should have, to not pay that invoice.
That is correct. So that was the screen that would come up upon payment,
Warning.
Ding, ding,
Some
ding.
of us are old enough to write, Danger Will Robinson, right? That sort of thing comes up on the screen, but you know what? It
It's a little
doesn't
X.
prevent It doesn't prevent the transaction from happening. It doesn't route it to someone for an override approval. It was merely an information screen where I click, okay, thank you very much for the notice, and the transaction sails through. So that is a flaw in the design of that automated control in the system and the failure to have a compensating manual control to stop that transaction from being paid.
At
There
schools.
was at schools, it was already a violation because you were in the contract, so you were already over budget regardless, right? So that was a weakness, that was an internal control override, that was a budget blown at that level by that. That's as candid a picture as I can paint. And I think that came through in the report. I think I think we made that clear in the report, that was an information-only box. What I've seen happen in those situations is, you know, it's awfully hard because there's so many times where, you know, a local government is different than the federal government, where there's an Anti-Deficiency Act that's out there that says thou shall not. There are still laws and regulations against that at the state level, but there are, you know, there are
There's compensating manuals.
yeah, there are ways that what I would recommend doing in a situation like that is having something in place that says, look, we're going to notify whomever that there is this budget overage, it's unexpected, we need to get this paid, we're going to come and get the appropriate budget approval at whatever the next cycle is, but everybody is aware that it occurred and why it occurred. And that, you know, that is not designed in this
Well, the county has a
at all.
process.
The county has a process, but the schools does not.
Schools could use the county process.
And because of, and my understanding of the way currently it would have to be configured, you know, that sort of thing would be routed to the superintendent would need to go to the schools board would need to approve it, and then they need to bring it over to you for approval. I mean, that seems to me to have to be the route to be able to follow on any sort of budget modification. So it'd have to go to the superintendent. Superintendent takes it to the board, her board for approval. Her board approves it, brings it to you for approval.
Should be a process like that, but it's not in place.
Correct.
And hopefully that's what got highlighted by this.
Yeah. It's a lot of things in here that we figured would be happening, but you opened our eyes to a lot of other things too when you started digging. And we knew it was bad.
I don't know how much we dug. They were pretty evident as we started, I would say.
Well, we also have a lot of experience, so we noticed that.
Yeah, I've
I've
got experience.
Was the information from the school system easy to obtain, or did you hit resistance?
I think, like any audit, everyone is always willing and happy to meet with you. And I think they were very welcoming. And where we hit resistance was when we started asking for things to 3 or 4 times, which we have to do to speak to the lack of sampling, right, which is our due diligence that we have to do. And then when we dig into the findings to get that additional stuff, it was resistance just not because of them not wanting, it's literally workload. We're giving them additional workload to someone who already has a part-time schedule. And so, you know, I think that particular resistance was much more, it wasn't that they didn't want to help, it's just there's only so many hours in the day, and with there not being automated controls, not being manual things that are readily available, we were asking a lot of them.
The only thing I'd add to that
I
is.
will say one more thing. I was not, there's a tone that is in the management responses, if you read them, that is different than the tone that we got from county or treasurer when we found a finding where so many of what we mentioned to, let's say, Mary, because she's sitting right there, sorry, has already been fixed because she wanted to invest the time and energy to just make sure it was done right. That's who she naturally is. We didn't have that same response from the manager response side of schools.
Yeah. And I think some of the resistance was literally, I think, a lack of visibility into what had gotten done pre-23. I think there were definite, the quality of the response, the quality of the information that we got was so much different for 23 than it was for any of the other years. So I think that covers, but in terms of getting us stuff, making time available, I've had people stonewall me before.
They did their best.
I did not get a sense that we were being frozen out, intentionally misled, ghosted, anything that you want to paraphrase that at. I think there was, any time we got to questions of a why or how come for some of those older years, there was just no context. And since there were no locatable documents, that the picture couldn't be painted.
I can understand with workload the person has, if you're already down, you got a full workload and something else is thrown on you, that can get a little aggravating, have to try to do all that, but you just have to make time for it, even if it takes a little bit longer in the day to get it done.
Yep.
That's the way it has to work. Switch here just a little teeny bit. I'm back on page 31 here. Let's see, you determined that the school lacks a consistent and formal procedure for retaining new hire documentation, testing revealed missing employment verification information, employment contracts, completed background information, no evidence of the date employees were enrolled. Also, in found that the termination procedure lacks consistency. Not all termination checklists were completed. It's just goes on and on and on. This is something that they need to keep records on employees. So if, need to be a fallback on these things. And I don't know how long that they retain these records. I have no idea. But if they just keep it there long enough for an employee to be there when they leave to dispose of it, that's going to come back to bite you.
It's likely to come back to bite this year, actually. I get to geek out for a second on accounting stuff. There's a new accounting standard that gets implemented this year on compensated absences that is going to change the amount of the compensated absence accrual that gets recorded on the face of the financial statements. Compensated absences based on start date, based on position and all that. So if you've got incomplete information in that personnel file, that calculation is going to be very difficult to do and to audit. So what we're seeing at other local governments around the country, and we're getting ready to start on, actually it's an internal audit for a school system in Maryland around their compensated absences. They're taking this opportunity to go through their HR database and clean up all that information, see what's incomplete, see what do I have a record of to support the number that's in the human resources database. So this, if there's a year to really clean up and you focused in on that human resources finding, this is a year to do it because it could impact that accrual number that's going to have to get recorded as of June 30th, 2025. That concludes the geeky accounting part of the presentation. Thank you.
Hmm.
Oh, Lord, I don't know. Anyone else want to go for a minute? I got 100 questions to ask you. but-
I want to go back to the purchasing and procurement.
Go anywhere you want to go.
Altrell can chime in on this. The county had purchase and procurement policy. It's all county funds being used for the purchasing. The schools come under that same policy and procedure? Should they come under that same policy and procedure?
The small purchase policy and procurement policy that we have is just for county. I'm not aware of the school's purchase policy. They have something separate from the county.
Let me say, I can say this. Guess what I'm looking at, and we were talking about controls. I'm looking at a control. Evidently, their purchase policy is not working. How can school system, how can everything county-wide coming in with county funds be put under one purchasing and procurement policy? Can it be done like that?
But that's something we can take a look at. And I don't know if there are other examples out there that other localities are
No,
handling it that way, but
I've generally seen separate policies and procedures. They're similarly designed. I mean, generally, it's transactions below X dollars, have at it. From, and I'm just picking numbers here, from $2,500 to $10,000, 3 verbal quotes. From $10,000 to $50,000, 3 written quotes. $50,000 and above, you've got to do some sort of full and open competition. You can always purchase off of state contracts. You can also do cooperative, all of those sort of things. But everybody's got a purchasing policy like that. Most school districts' spending is at a lower total level than their primary government, so those numbers are adjusted downwards accordingly. So, if you wanted to harmonize those policies, you'd have to harmonize them down to the school board level. If you wanted it consistently applied at the county level, what you'd be doing is generally, I think, you'd be taking your purchasing level down to the school's level, which may not make sense for you from an administrative standpoint. So, but what I think the board could certainly consider is that as, you've got the hammer, which is the appropriation that you do every year. As part of that appropriation, you could certainly say for any purchases over X dollars, the board needs, this board needs to be notified. I've seen something like that happen. I've got one, what the level is in the district anymore? Is it still $1 million for council approval, or is it $5 million?
It's $1 million.
It's $1 million. So, the way that it works at Washington DC is any contract over a certain dollar amount, in this case $1 million, has to come before their city council for approval. That is ultimately for large purchases, something that the board could consider. I would suggest a good route through, the Appropriations Act, if you're trying to exercise some fiduciary oversight like that, is through this notification. Every month you're expecting to get X. That could be, we want a budget to actual statement from the county or from schools every month.
Yes.
We want a notification of all purchase orders, contracts, whatever you've entered over X dollars every month, so that there's information that's coming. You can put that in. and if you approve it, then it's up to them to decide whether or not they're going to actually comply with it. They may not like it, they may fight it. Then it becomes a matter of law that's out there to see whether or not you can actually do that. I don't think it's an unreasonable request to do that. I think it is highly, 95% of the school districts get their funds approved at the total level. And it's only in very unusual circumstances that things are done at the category level. And because it increases the administrative burden on the schools, and it increases the administrative burden on this board. Because, we're developing the 26-27 budget now, right? So you're making a prediction about what you think is going to happen in May of 2027 today. So, the more precise you've got those budget authorities and the more, approvals they've got to get to be able to move money around, the more burden it puts on them, the more burden it puts on you to do things. You may need to do that. It's up to you to decide based on what you're seeing as evidence of past practice and current practice to decide to do something like that. But, it would put you in a distinct minority around the country, not saying that's good, bad, or indifferent, just saying what it is. And that's this board's ultimate hammer in all of this. And, if you continue down that route, if purchasing is a hot button, put something in that says anything over X dollars needs, you need to be notified.
And I guess for me, it's the negative balances, categories, or line items.
I know that's out there specifically in 24.
Well, that's the thing right there, the negative balance. Money, if you put the money in categories in there, they have 7 different categories. So they overspend one category. All right, that check still gets written. Shouldn't be written, because that's a transfer of funds from one category to the other.
I would argue
supposed
that
to
it
be.
shouldn't have even been, that the transaction should have never been entered into.
Yeah, but they,
You can't put it at the check level. You got to put it all the way back because someone
put
made
it all the
the
way
decision.
back, yes, that's right.
Yeah, so that's, if you want to get to the root of where it happens, that's where it happened.
Yeah, that's actually where it happens.
That's where it
Check
happened.
is the last thing. But,
The check just brings it to the sunlight.
yeah. And that's,
But it brings it to the sunlight based on general spending patterns, May and June. Because for the most part in those categories, just based on historical spending patterns, they're going to have authority until generally in the last quarter of the year, unless something really weird's going on with a large purchase or something like that. So that's why it's so imperative to have these purchase orders cut timely, so that you can see when that budget authority is being used. It doesn't do any good, and I see this in so many instances where people won't cut they set up a purchase order system, and they won't cut the purchase order until they get the invoice in. Because their policies say, I can't pay an invoice without a purchase order. They do it, but that's an ineffective control, right? But I see it all the time. So that's where it's all the more imperative. When you enter into that transaction, you have to issue the purchase order at that time. And then that box, stop means stop. If that box comes up, it's got to get routed somewhere for somebody to do something about it. It can't just be an okay. When you click okay, that just tells me that you're managing to that total level and not to the individual category level.
well, that's what's being done.
That's exactly what's being done.
I agree.
All right, you also mentioned in here some Fund 5 accounts that were not kind of hidden accounts. You know, it looks like all of the money should be in basically one account, or should be all put into that budget instead of unseen money.
Yes, my belief is that any funds, whether they are grant-funded, locally funded, whatever, should appear in a budget that gets presented to the school board for approval and gets presented to this board for its review and approval.
Yeah, when you look at, if you gave someone 20 million to spend for that budget, and when you look at the end of the year budget and they spent 25 million, where did the other 5 come from? That's the question, and you don't get an answer for it.
Do you know any of the particulars of that Fund 5 account?
So.
That was the ESSER money, right?
Yeah, it's the ESSER money, and, you know, I think where this becomes, and we actually have an appendix on this if you want to blow through it. It's the ones with all the spreadsheets. Keep going right there. Okay, so keep going. One more. So you can see the ESSER budget per the system. Those are the Fund 5 additional funds. And then so what we had to do, so this is essentially how we go through our process, exactly what you just said. You know, we're looking at the budget and saying, you know, why aren't all the numbers matching, right? Part of it is systematic, right? You're not talking apples to apples with particular lines, but that's just a rounding error, right? A lot of it, there were consistently millions missing, and we took a look at it, and then we basically had to ask for it, and then we realized that it was those federal grant funds, most of which were ESSER funds, that were not being presented in the budget, because we couldn't figure out why the budget in the school side didn't match the budget that was approved here. That is why. Now, if you guys are operationally running, you know, when you're looking at something like dollars per pupil, and when you guys are selecting what's an appropriate budget, you're gonna look at your neighboring counties and see what they're spending dollars per pupil. But you don't understand, if you don't see the whole picture, what's apples to
Exactly right.
apples.
That's
And so
exactly
how do you
right.
make a decision if you don't have everything into the budget itself?
That's
So
correct.
that's where, I mean, you think you're in line with your county, but there's another $3 million going out there. And so that's why we did that particular deep dive there, which was outside of, you know, essentially outside of scope, but we did it because we wanted to make sure that we understood what was being budgeted, what was being spent, and why we couldn't see the clear picture.
Now, why do I think that occurred? At least in this case, at this magnitude, ESSER was new. So when the original budget was developed, no one knew that ESSER in the first year was going to be there. But as soon as it became apparent that ESSER existed and the county was going to receive some ESSER funds through its school district,
Should have been amended.
the superintendent should have proposed a budget modification to the school district. School district should have brought that modification over to the county for its review and approval. Budgets aren't monolithic. They're not etched in granite. They are living, breathing documents. And again, I'm guessing today what I'm going to be spending in June of '27, right? I mean, that's the way the budget development process works. So then let's go to year 2. Well, I'm not sure what I'm going to get in year 2 either. Well, I know how much I got in year 1. Let's put some sort of estimate in there, and then as I get better put some sort of estimate in there in the budget to be presented by the superintendent to the schools, for the schools to approve, to bring over to you for approval. And then when I have better visibility into ultimately how much I'm going to get, then I come back and follow that same process for a budget modification. And I don't know if schools was impacted by the miscalculation in the prior administration, but I know one of my clients was the one that was the most heavily impacted. Their state calculation was blown by $26 million. So they were worried they were going to have to come back because they relied on a state number for that budget. They were going through the process of amending their budget, getting it approved by the schools, and then going over the county for approval before the state stepped in to make them whole. You know, because of that. But that's the way the process should work. That all of these funds, even if I'm not 100% sure, I've got some inkling that I'm going to get something. You know, I make my best estimate. I roll with that until I get better numbers, and I come back with a modification. But I think there is this fear of the modification process that drives a lot of this. And I think, well, we couldn't estimate it, so we're not going to put it in the budget. That's, I think it started because we didn't anticipate it. It just, was a new program when COVID hit. And then, it grew from there.
Yeah, but if you reconcile your accounts between the school's account, the county's account every quarter, all this stuff should be picked up.
But they had segregated these funds into a totally separate fund. So
That's
they
the
were keeping
problem
it,
right
they
there.
were keeping it, well, I mean, it's a blessing and a curse. I mean, it is entirely appropriate, and actually I encourage them, and would encourage anybody, to have a separate grant fund. And because that gives that level of accountability, and then even inside of that grant fund, you've got individual cost centers for each of the individual grants. That makes it really easy to do all of the reporting that needs to be done and roll everything up. And then you've got a real good picture of, hey, here are all my federal grants, or here are all my state grants.
But it should be shown as a revenue.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I don't have a problem with it being separate. You can track it easier.
But it is,
But
but
it
it's
needs to be-
presented to the school district for its review and approval, and then it's presented to this board for its review and approval.
Correct. Thank you. There'll probably be another one.
It come in threes.
All right, gentlemen, somebody else take over for a minute.
Zero-based budgeting. You guys are familiar with that system?
Just a little.
Well, it's been brought to our attention, and our constituents wanted me to ask you guys about your opinion about it as a fit for Northumberland County.
As
As a way for our departments to do their budgeting or handle their budget.
it's a way. It's probably the most detailed and most meaningful budget build that is out there to do that. It takes a lot of time and effort to implement. It takes a lot of time and effort to monitor. But it is, the gold standard in the way to do it. That being said, very few governments do bottom up. They do some modified form of that, where they will take last year's plus or minus some inflation percentage, and then they'll look at either big projects that I did last year, big expenses I had last year and I'm not gonna have this year, so they'll back that out. Big stuff that I'm gonna do this year that I didn't have last year, so they'll add that in. So they'll do some sort of modification instead of truly a bottom up of, all right, I'm gonna start, how many people I got in the department? Build up the payroll costs, all right. What do I need to keep the lights on? What do I need to buy this, that, the other thing? And just go through the closest analogy I could do is to basically go through every single check you cut, decide whether you're going to cut that check again this year, and if so, is it going to be more or less or the same as last year?
Would it require new hires in the county? You've seen what we're working with.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's the problem, you have to decide if the personal expense is going to be, you're gonna have to decide whether or not the personnel, expense will be worth.
the additional
The
quality
rigor.
and timeliness and rigor
Yes.
of the numbers that you are getting.
I'm not ready to advocate for it yet. I wanted to run it through you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's certainly the gold standard and the ideal that everyone has thrown around through my entire career. Very few governments have done it because it is administratively intense. It, and again, just geek out just a second, it will be interesting to see with the advent of artificial intelligence tools and such, whether or not zero-based budgeting will become a more cost-effective tool for governments of this size, where you can, buy a piece of software that is going to ingest the payroll register, is going to ingest the checkbook, and blurt out, here is everything that you've spent, and then you start playing with, how much am I going to need? Am I going to spend this again this year? Then, that's the way you could actually build it up. I think there will be a tool like that comes out that will end up being cost effective at some point. We ain't there yet. That's a great question.
All right, since your work was kind of hampered by the lack of documentation and all, from the school side and all, what does Virginia law require when it comes to documentation of school spending? And based on your report, it appears the school is not in compliance with record-keeping requirements since you don't have the documentation to identify the fraud, waste, abuse, or whatever. And how's this going to be corrected? Or is it going to be corrected? And I guess a lot of it falls back on us, doesn't it?
Well, I think it is in the process of being corrected. I don't know that anybody's going to go back and try and recreate documents or organize things from 19, 20, 21, 22. But there's certainly been improvement in 23 from what we saw in the prior years. We haven't done any extended procedures in any year since then. So I can't speak to any of the current practices, but the trend was certainly going in the proper direction in terms of the record keeping.
Oh, I don't know. There's so many things in this report that's lacking. So much.
Well, and that's why we've tried to focus on the recommendations.
Yeah, I
Is to,
understand that.
and to give stuff that we thought was achievable within a cost-effective manner to implement. It would have been very easy for me on segregation of duties to say, to do
Get
some
into
sort of
stuff.
study and say, we want, we think you need 5 new people. I mean, but that's just not practical, right? So it's, all right, given that, what's the compensating control? The compensating control for that is when you have a lack of segregation of duties like that and one person doing too many things, is sunshine. Get more rigorous around your reporting. Get more reports to the county administrator, to the superintendent. Present those to the school board, to this board. That's the way that you compensate for those, lack of segregation of duties at a government this size. It's sunshine is really the way to get that done.
All right. Gentlemen, any other questions?
What positions specifically in the county do we need to concentrate on succession planning most heavily? I know that we talked about Ms. Mary Dotson's position.
Yeah, I would say Mary, for sure. Sorry, Mary. Excellent.
And
what
then
she
Mary.
does. And then Mary again. No, I mean, that's the thing is, you may find that you're gonna need 3 people to do what Mary does, because she's been doing it so long and she does it so well. So, it's not gonna be you hire someone and a month later Mary leaves. You're gonna need a year and change to figure out, you should be training someone slowly, right? I would say that Tara probably needs someone, in the same position who's over at schools, or at least a secondary part-time person. If not, I'll tell you, when I give these recommendations, I'm saying them with 2 things in aspect, right? One, just in case Mary gets hit by the snowplow, right, that's one. But really, also, as we start talking about segregation of duties, there's a lot of stuff, and approvals that go back and forth between Latrell, for example, and Mary, right? Because he's signing off on something that she's approving or whatever. But having someone in there who's doing that, who's not the county administrator, would be incredibly helpful. So like when you're doing a PO, like someone who selects a vendor, someone else should be cutting the PO or paying the invoice, so that one person isn't doing the entire process. If you have a secondary person in there, you can do that, right? Which you just don't have now, so you're relying on the sunshine and compensatory controls.
The other thing that's out there is that a lot of the controls that are in place are still ones that grew up in a more manual time. As you may consider at some point in the future, enhancements to your current accounting system, to your current computer system, you will need to consider automated workflows that will route some things around so that you're taking advantage of the technology that's out there that will reduce the manual administrative burden that is currently in your control environment because of the limited functionality that you have turned on within your accounting system. And oh, by the way, for the controls that you, for the controls that you could turn them on and let them operate
Yes.
as well is the other key. So there are some, I think, some IT controls that are out there that the county could be taking advantage of to reduce the administrative burden. But given the life cycle that your IT system is in, and given some of the things that are coming down the pike in terms of financial reporting requirements that are going to be 2-3 years down the road for governments like yourself that go to the bond market, there are going to be some IT system changes that are going to need to be made in the next couple of years that will give you an excellent opportunity to really explore how to take on the more efficient operation of controls to take care of the technology. The controls that you've set up on the county side, are working well. They are working well. There are a lot of manual controls, there's a lot of stuff being traded back and forth. There's a lot of burden on very key people that you need to be leading and doing other things that they have to do. But as you're planning succession, as you're planning IT system upgrades and things like that, keep in mind some of these areas in the report where you might be able to automate some of these controls, and that will reduce folks' administrative burdens.
There are also good options when you're looking for systems, in, let's say, 3 to 5 years, is it's not what it used to be, right? When you guys are bringing RDA on board, where you made a huge investment in the system and it stayed static until you decided to develop something new. Your systems now that are built for smaller governments, where you can buy licenses for individuals, where it is not such the burden. And you use it as configured, and you redesign the processes in the county so that you're following that automated control structure.
Yep.
So that's an opportunity. So it's not the investment that you had when you put RDA in. So as RDA cycles out, and you have personnel changes, it may be something to look into.
Does department heads now have access to the RDA system to manage their budget?
They do not, no.
Because there are systems out there, software out there that gives them the privileges to go in, to see their budget, and do the budget transfers online, and even go in and create their own purchase order and attach it to invoices to have it turned in. And
Yeah, as far as their budget goes, Mary sends that out to them on a monthly basis. Now, RDA, I do believe, has the ability for them to do the purchase orders and send that in to them, but we just don't have that module.
Questions, gentlemen?
what else you got?
Most of my stuff's been answered. Y'all have been asking questions.
I got one.
Uh-oh.
So, you've identified some changes that need to be made. So, as the budget is being presented to us this year from the school system, what should we ask for? How should the budget be presented to this board?
I think the entirety of the spend. So however they've got their internal fund accounting done, how do they control their spending? So they've got a general fund, they've got this ESSER fund, it should be presented exactly the way that they manage it internally in their ledger.
That's right. Should be. And we have not been getting any of that. Gonna have to change this year.
I mean, the other thing that I would strongly recommend, and I was talking with a member of the public earlier, and the classic way to respond to this sort of report is to develop a corrective action plan. Corrective action plan basically has several columns to it. It's like, what's the finding? What are the high-level steps we are going to do to address it? Who's responsible for it? And when's the fix going to get implemented?
I'm glad you brought that up.
And then that, so that's, what are the steps, what are the action steps that are out there? So I think it is very reasonable for this board to request of the county administrator and the superintendent for a corrective action plan to address the findings that are in this report. And the corrective action plan, again, the biggest deficiency that I see in corrective action plans are the last 2 points that I brought up, which is who's responsible for implementing the fix. So you want a position, what is the level of the person that is responsible for the fix? And then when will the fix be implemented by? And that's a date specific.
Yes.
And then
Have
that
a
way,
timescale.
you can be monitoring all of that, and you can be asked, you can get that corrective action plan, and then you can have a period during the meeting where you say, how is the corrective action plan coming along?
Well, you did talk to the school board, the way you talked to us, right? You talked to the superintendent and the school board.
We have not, we've briefed the superintendent, we have not briefed the board.
And you recommended some of these changes to her?
They've got the report.
They've got the report and they had to respond. There's a management response in the report.
She didn't ask you all about talking to the school board or anything?
We were not.
This is Dr. Curran, and I am on the school.
Hello?
Okay.
I'm sorry, but this is Dr. Curran, and I've not heard anything about this, and I am on the school board.
Right, that's what I was.
Breakdown of communication.
Yeah, that's what
All right, well, that's lack of communication right
Yeah,
there.
that's the reason I asked you, did you talk to the school board too? And I doubt you didn't.
Yes, there's a lack of communication between what's going on here tonight and what the school board understands. So let's be clear on what we're saying.
I think I'm very clear on what I'm saying, which is we've communicated.
But sir, you use the word if, I don't know how many times tonight, if the school board doesn't do this and the school doesn't do that, you're using the word if. That's speculation in every concept of my understanding of the law and what's going on. So, when you're projecting what you think needs to be done, but we have not delineations between what happened before 2023 and 2023 passed, and you're not making any delineations on you're addressing what happened prior to 2023, but you're not addressing what happened after 2023. And we have made significant changes. And I really want to present to you, sir, what or who is responsible for what happened prior to 2023 and your expert knowledge, and what has been done since 2023.
Well, I want to say something before he answers that.
Go ahead.
Both of these people from UHY had stated tonight before us that they have seen significant change in 2024. So they stated that in front of all of us here tonight. So that's
It's in the report also.
It's in the report also. So,
I agree with that.
yes, sir.
Totally.
And I can't speak
But
to anything since
I haven't
the
seen-
date of our report. But the
And
superintendent
I
has
understand
seen-
that. But you're asking them to speculate on what's happening now based on what the scope of their employment was. And the scope of their employment was to see if there was any illegal activity, because we did a forensic audit. Right? Am I wrong? That's what was asked of us, to see if anything was done illegally or if it was improper procedures that weren't followed or should have been followed. And what I'm hearing tonight is that those procedures were not followed, and I get that, but we have made changes since then. But we're mixing oxymorons here about what, one side did versus the other, and there's not a clarity between what was done after 2023 and what was done before 2023. And we're working on what the school board did. And the other thing that I have a real problem with is the fact that we're concentrating on the school board when this was a countywide audit. And I don't see any differentiation here. I see this as an attack on the school board, and I have objection to that. And I'm going to go on the record and say that.
Well, yes, we've been talking about the school section right now. We haven't even gotten to the treasurer's section or the, or any other section in the government yet.
That's not actually true. That's not actually true, because
the list as it came in the report.
that's not true, because we talked about what the findings were for the school board and what the findings were for the county, but we're concentrating on only the school board. My question is simply, who's responsible here?
Well, school board's going to be responsible for their actions,
School board's going to be responsible for what?
for correcting the problems that are in this audit.
And I have no problem, and I don't think I represent the school board, that we accept that there was a definite problem before 2023, and we are addressing those problems now. And if the accountant here is legitimately said over time and time again that we're not, that there's been a difference between 23 on versus 2021, but we're concentrating all our efforts on what happened before then. We cannot change what happened before 2023. But I can tell you that there's been a significant change in the way that the school board's done. I have gone to this board, I have gone to the Treasury's office, and I talked about bridging the counting systems so that we can all get on the same page, and I don't hear any concept of that whatsoever. And I'm sorry, but I am really upset about this. I want to know if we're going to concentrate on before 2021. Where was the problem? Who allowed this to happen? If that's what the problem is here, and that's what we want to identify, then let's do that. But we have made changes since then. I know Ms. Booth has provided all the documentation to the accounting firm about what she has available to her. And yes, and you're right, she does have a lot of documentation, and she doesn't have the time to go through it. And you know what? Nobody provided the school board or Miss Booth or anybody at Northumberland County Schools the opportunity to pay overtime to provide these documents. We have a normal job that we need to provide, and we're providing that job. And this has, exacerbated the ability for the county to provide the documentation to the accounting firm. And I'm not blaming the accounting firm, but I will say, if you're commenting on what regulations are coming down the line and how the school board or the county is addressing those concerns, that's not in the scope of what we hired you to do. We hired you to do a forensic audit on what happened in the last 5 years. And honestly, I don't see that you've provided us anything. There's no criminal activity. There's no misuse of funds. There's definitely a problem with how bills were paid. I agree with that
I disagree
100%.
with that
And there are
assessment.
recommendations. I'm not done yet. So don't interrupt me, please. There's no evidence that the audit has anything to do with future perceptions. And I'm not liking the way this is going, and I'm not liking the fact that the school board is being attacked. I'm not liking.
Cut him off. Mr. Reagan, would you comment on what you found in that report? I know you wanted to make a comment just a minute ago.
My only comment was, we state very clearly, we couldn't conclude one way or the other based on the documentation that was provided to us whether waste, fraud, abuse occurred. Because the documentation was either not available or was not in a manner which would allow us to conclude.
It's on page 4.
Yeah, that's on page 4. Yeah. And you
Please stop muting me.
And you also found findings through the treasurer's office, right on down the line, that there were problems in there. The treasurer's office, in their management response, they have tried to correct those problems. That's about all you can ask someone to do. That's exactly what we're asking the school system to do. Correct their problems.
And I think they are doing that. I do agree that
they
you
are,
can see.
They are doing it.
I hope that came through in the report. I do want to give school board and staff credit for the work that has been done to significantly improve the quality and the timeliness of the data that was presented through 2023. I cannot speak to anything that occurred in 2024 and is occurring in 2025. That was beyond the scope
you haven't
of
seen the
what we do.
information, so there's no way for you to say anything.
I do believe that the recommendations follow from the findings that were in the report. But I am, again, because you do see the management's response from both the county and the schools, folks at the school board were afforded the opportunity, the staff was afforded the opportunity to make a response. I cannot speak to whether or not members of the staff briefed the school board on any of the information that was in the report. I am more than willing to go to the school board if asked to by the county, because you are my contracting office. So you have to authorize me to do that.
we have to
I am
authorize it.
more than willing to do that. And we'll stay there as long as I need to talk about whatever matter folks want to bring up in the report. But again, what we tried to do was to say and try to paint the picture that was specific to the school board. There is a definite difference in the period 19, 20, 21, and 22 from what we're seeing in 23. Our work stopped after 23.
All right.
Right? So we can't speak to anything that is going on currently. And the recommendations that follow are based on what we observed through 23. And then management had the opportunity to respond to that in the report.
Your opinion to,
Who received copies of this final report?
could you please stop?
Yes. The report was made public for everybody to look at.
Yes, the report was sent to me. I made the report public. We put it online, several locations on our webpage. I also sent that report to the superintendent, to Tara Booth, to
But the drafts were circulated
Pam
to everybody.
King, and to Gail, and to Mary.
But
All right.
before the final report, the drafts, I mean, those were circulated to folks. That's how we got the management's response.
Yep.
So again, I can't speak to what someone at the schools did or did not do to brief other members about what was in the report, what was in management's response to our report. That was probably, I will take the bullet for that one. I probably should have thought that one through better, but it wasn't necessarily in the scope of my work. I'm responding and I'm providing it here and taking the direction from the county board. But, given the opportunity to do this again, I should have had the foresight to make sure that I held a similar briefing with the school board. But would only do so under request from this board.
I think when we had the interview to hire you, and we went through the final interviews, one of the things that was stated, and correct me if I'm wrong here in any way, board members, but one of the things that was stated was that we weren't looking for fraud or taking of monies. We weren't looking for that. I mean, if you found it, yes, fine, but that's not what we were looking for. We were looking for how and why money was being spent. But, and I'm glad you didn't find any such thing as that, and that makes me proud because the people we've got here in the county working.
Well, again, I don't know that I can reach that conclusion because there were documents
I understand.
that were not either
But
available.
with what you've got today, you see none of that type of thing there. And we said we don't believe that's there. We hope it's not there. We don't
Right.
think it's there. We have,
But, I mean,
okay, just want to make that clear.
Yeah, I agonized over those words on page 4 as to how to appropriately phrase those to convey, that unfortunately, given the quality of the records, I don't know what I don't know. But that in and of itself is a finding because, the whole purpose of the documentation is to support the spending that occurred. And we don't have that.
All right. So, Mr. Tadlock, you did forward a copy to Dr. Wargrove and all, so she should have forwarded that to her school board.
I did forward that
Yeah.
copy to him.
So that's not our problem right there.
Hopefully, she will invite you to talk to the school board. I think that's the only way a lot of this can be cleared up, the way this gentleman
I know the way here.
What
Have
else
you
you got,
heard,
Richard?
have you heard any information from the other agencies about the audit?
I'm sorry about the,
Have you heard anything about the audit that you sent to the other agencies?
no, sir.
Well, we have Ms. King here tonight, and I know she started making changes in there, correcting the problems that were found. And that's what we're asking. We're asking for these things to be corrected. I know some of them look like they're minor, and I guess, they could be a little bit bigger than what we think, but at least they're getting corrected. And all the other agencies are doing it, and that's what we expect out of every agency of the county. Correct these problems in a timely manner. Don't drag this on for months and months.
Well, and that's where the formal corrective action plan will come in handy. And again, I think it's under government auditing standards. When you develop a corrective action plan, two of the key elements of that is who's responsible for the fix and by what date will the fix be implemented. So any corrective action plan that you ask for, make sure that you've got those two elements, because everybody's going to focus in on what the problem is, what the action steps are that they're going to take, and then what the resulting improvement is going to be. But you need a nose to hold accountable for it, and then you need a date by which they're going to execute.
I think that's good advice.
Well, that's what we want to do.
Look, I just wanted to bring up, Ms. King, did you have any questions about anything?
That was one of my last questions, and it isn't for this gentleman, it's for this board, because I got in my notes. We spent tax money to have this audit done, and it wasn't cheap. It was at the request of citizens. So now that it's done and we got the result, at the end of the day, it's on us, on the county administrator. What are you going to do? And what I got in my notes, okay, we got to have an action plan with a timeline. Who's going to do what? And we need to have benchmarks, and we need to be able to document progress or lack of progress. That needs to be put in writing.
Well, I think you're going to see that happen tonight,
It's got to be in writing.
as soon as we get done here.
And we move forward from that. And it's not just solely for the school board, it's for the whole shebang.
Yes, for everybody.
We're lacking in technology. It needs to be upgraded. And, I was told when I got in the fire service years ago, one of the biggest injury in the fire service is hurt feelings. Okay, but unfortunately, it's not a workers' comp claim for that.
No, you can't worry with hurt feelings.
And I hate saying it, but people don't like change, and it may be some hurt feelings. But we gotta upgrade this stuff. We gotta move forward to make things better for the citizens and for this county. And it's on us now. The results are back from this report.
If I may. I do recognize, a large reason why the administrative systems deteriorate is because folks are loath to spend money on them because they're not programmatic. At some point, you fall below I call it an inflection point, where the quality of the internal controls damages the timeliness, the reliability, and the relevance of the financial information that you get. And you guys are at that point where you've got to invest in your systems administratively in order, and again, this is my opinion coming out of this as a professional that works in this day in and day out, that you are at that point where you've got to spend some money, as painful as it is, on these administrative systems because it will benefit the effective and efficient delivery of operations through better quality information that you get to run the organization. That's, you know, that's just a fact of where you sit today, or it's my belief where you sit today. I shouldn't say a fact.
All right, gentlemen, you have any more questions?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
I
sir.
believe I understood him as saying that he said, I work for you, talking about the board a while ago.
Yes, he does.
And he
They
said-
work for us.
And the comment came up about going to the school board and speaking to the school board, which I think is a good thing.
Yes.
But shouldn't that, by all means, be an open meeting and not a closed meeting?
Yes. Open meeting.
So I guess what we're saying,
If we ask him to go.
yes,
It has to come from this board.
yes,
And the school board should receive the report from Dr. Wargo. I don't have any control over that. But they should have received the report. Well, according to what I've heard tonight, they didn't get the report. So I can't help that. But the report's been made public on our website for anyone to look at. We made sure of that so anybody can pick it up. And you could have called your supervisor if you couldn't get it offline, and we'd have printed you a copy off and give it to you. And I had some people ask me for a copy. And I printed a copy and they picked it up, or else I dropped it off on the way.
Yep.
I had no problem with doing that.
That's a good retail politician there.
Well,
He probably
you gotta look
charged.
out for people. Some people don't like computers, and I can't much blame them sometimes.
That's the people that read to us.
Yep. So you gotta look
I
out for
see
those
that every
people.
day, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Right.
All right, gentlemen, we have any more questions?
I mean, I'm thankful for on behalf of our firm to serve this board and the citizens of the county in doing this. And again, we will take, you know, any direction that you've got for any further follow-up on this report that you see fit for us to do.
Okay, all right. Well, I'd like to thank you with taking us on as a client and going through the process of getting the material for us and then presenting it to us tonight. I think y'all have done very well. I'm pleased with it. I know there were hurdles for you to jump over a few times, but I think y'all have done an excellent job.
Thank you.
So I really do appreciate it. And now it's up to us to get busy with the information that you've gathered for us.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming. Mr. Tadlock, have you sent them their check? Send them a check with a nice thank you letter in there. Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. Watch yourself.
down.
Thank you.
I will.
Huh? I can't hear you. I can't either. I just can't believe it. Y'all have a safe trip back.
Thanks a lot. Gotta find me some oysters.
All right.
I know what you mean.
All right.
I thought Chip was gonna bring a truck up tonight.
Gentlemen, we've had a report, and what I want Mr. Tadlock to do is to come up with a correction action plan. He needs to get with Dr. Wargo onto this. I want to know who's going to take care of things. I want a date, and I expect this information to be back to us by our next board meeting, which will be
That's for all, that's for all.
all agencies of the county, not just one, but all agencies of the county. And that'll put the next board meeting on,
The end of
Be-
the report, they got to come up with action.
be February the 13th, Mr. Tadlock, 2025. Does that agree with you all, gentlemen?
Yes.
And that is my motion.
No second.
Oh, you got it.
All right, any other discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All right, what else do we need, gentlemen? Also, one other thing I've been thinking about. Let me look at my notes here. All grants that are coming in, half the time we get someone standing up in front of us telling us that they received a grant and they're looking for money. All right. I would like to know when they start the grant process, inform us of what they're going to do, when they start that process, so we are aware of what's going to be happening down the line, so it's not just thrown on us like a ton of bricks. And also in that, I'm going to want to know what their timeline is for receiving a grant and their timeline of spending the money.
You want a policy and procedure for
I
grants?
want policy and procedures, what it boils down to.
Mr. Chairman, are you saying that they should or they can, or are you saying they shall?
They shall,
Can we back that up?
yes.
Especially, well, if it's matching funds, you can.
Yeah. We're going to back it up, and we will put, and I'll put that in the form of a motion.
I'll second that one.
All right, we got a motion and a second. We have any other discussion now, gentlemen? All right, no other discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against? All right, motion passes. All right, Mr. Tadlock, you've got a couple of things to do. And if you can get that back by board meeting two would be good. I'll get the documentation straight for us to look at. Anything else, gentlemen? Ms. King, you have any comments tonight? I know you, I see you back there fidgeting. I figured you had a whole bunch to say. Don't be bashful now.
The only comment we have is if the category's overspent, all you have to do is tell us, don't pay it.
Can you come up?
Come on up so we can hear you.
And I'm glad you said that, because I'm sitting here churning on that one.
How he was saying if the categories are overspent that the little box comes up, yes, it does. But unless we're told not to pay it, then we pay it.
Don't pay it.
So, I mean,
She needs a motion.
I'll make it as a motion.
You want to make a motion?
Yep.
All right, you got a second. Oh, you can second it, Junior. All right, Junior second. Any other discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
There you go.
so if it's overspent, don't pay it.
Don't pay it if it's overspent.
Okay?
School
Do
board's
that.
the only ones with categories.
Any agency, any county that overspends their budget. You need to say something?
Just to reiterate on what Pam was saying. Remember, we've had that discussion in our little meeting, and we put out the question is, if the school brings their stuff over and it's overspent, it's just like what I do. If pop box come up there, because that was one of my corrective actions that I do, that invoice comes out. And if they don't give me a budget transfer, it don't get paid. My other thing is, I give them an end of the month report, so they should be watching that before they ever send me bills over to pay. But where I was going with Pam's, yes, the pop box comes up, but if they send payroll over, you're giving her permission not to approve their payment for payroll for the school. That's where that over category may sometimes come in.
What would be a situation where that would pop up pertaining to payroll?
Because they took the money for something else.
Say they overspent on overtime, or they overspent on part-time. Not that the school does overtime, I don't know if they do overtime, because I don't get into theirs. But in payroll, we get a report, what lines is insufficient. It's not a pop box. So when Pam and them key it on their side, they're keying it to that line item, that category. So if that category comes up overspent, it may be some payroll in there, is what I'm trying to say. Am I right? It could be that instruction line.
Well, when I enter it in the expenditure account, they just bring me over a sheet that tells me their checks add up to $1 million, 500,000 is for instruction, 100,000 is for facilities, down the line. I enter it to that expenditure account. I can't tell you that this specific check is for this thing, and this one is for this, and this is for that. I don't know that. I just have that total amount that I'm entering into that expenditure account. So if that account is over, when I go to enter it, you're telling me that I have to reject all of those checks. And yes, it could be payroll included in that. It could be withholdings.
Benefits.
It could be several things.
Yeah.
That's what the motion stated.
Okay.
All right, now, if you are doing your accounting and you are following through with what you're spending monthly or whatever it is, if you're doing it that month, and when you're looking at it and your balance is up here and you got 100,000 in here and finally you're down and you have $500 left and you got an invoice for 600, it'll tell you not to write that check. You have to carry it over to next. Now, yeah, they should know before it ever gets to you. This will correct that problem.
And my question is, are you going to let the school board know, or is it going to be all on us when they come over and I say, we can't,
Yep,
we can't.
Mr. Tadlock's gonna take care of that tomorrow.
Because we've been told by the board that we
Yeah,
can't.
that's right.
All right, Mr. Tadlock.
But I'd like to add, let's think about one more thing.
All right, let's
That-
think about it all.
I want to get back to the payroll thing. Now, if you do have something come up and it is pertaining to payroll, I'd instead of just wiping it out, contact the county administrator.
Yep.
And let us have a discussion, because I'm gonna tell you, when it comes to someone getting paid, I don't like messing with somebody's pay. And I don't like doing it at all.
The treasurer's office wouldn't sign it, the treasurer's office didn't do what they were, that's how it comes back.
Because some of those employees need their payment when it comes due. So,
Well, everybody needs to pay.
I think we
can change that.
we're gonna have to work with pay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that
You
can
can't hold
come
that.
back, like you say, to Mr. Tadlock, and then we can make adjustments right then and
Because
there.
I'm funny about that. I don't wanna mess with someone's income.
I hope you didn't mind me bringing it up, but that's how theirs roll into
Well, I'm
theirs.
glad you brought it up.
did, because when we originally thought about it, or actually, I didn't think about payroll in there.
Now,
I didn't
like, when
either.
I see it on our side, ours run by line item.
Yeah.
And in my payroll system, it throws a report out. It's not that pop box like we get on the vendor side. On the vendor side, we do get a pop box. I started to practice with budget transfers when we implemented those, and since we've been going through this process, those come out until if I have a negative line item, when it pops up, if I don't have the budget transfer, I pull it, I contact the department head. If you would like the bill paid, your budget line is overdue. It's over budget. In order to get it paid, I need a budget transfer.
And that's how we need to work.
So, but payroll system side, when you go to process payroll, it throws a report up, and it tells me what's insufficient funds. So there is a report that happens, so the school should see that report also. But when they start lumping stuff into categories and bring it to Gail, it's going to be hard for Gail she will have to weed through that.
Yeah.
Because it's lumped into one category.
could they break that report down a little bit more?
That is how we have the school in our budget is by category. So when they bring it to Gail and Pam, you correct me if I'm wrong. If it's all for instruction, Gail keys it to instruction. If it's for IT, she keys it to IT. But IT could have some payroll under there with taxes, with benefits, that has a position under there that she's, may throw a negative line item. So that's why I wanted to throw that out there to y'all, that
Right.
when Gail gets it, she's not seeing, she sees groups of it, but it's a total sheet.
But the chart of accounts of the school
Yeah,
system
right.
includes that, because that's what they give you guys. Last year, the big document you got, Electoral, that was the chart of accounts. It gives you that detail on their side. So they'll know if it's negative before they throw it to you.
Right, just like I know if it's negative before I throw it to our board.
All right. Well, that helps. That helps with your.
I just
explanation.
I mean, I knew we had discussed that, so that's where our concern was on that. Because if you tell us not to pay anything, she's coming out, you're gonna have some, they may not be happy people.
No, I don't want to bother with someone's pay.
But yeah, but it's categories, and that's what makes it harder for
Right, they're
Gail.
just bringing me a check register for 100 checks or however many, plus, a check register for withholdings, plus what, vendor payments and this, that, and the other. Not, this specific check is for this, and this specific, it could be, this check could be for several different things. I just get the category that I post to the vendor, to the expenditures, so.
But the school already
I have
knows
to
before it
reject
comes
it. I'm
over.
gonna have to reject the whole pile. I can't just pull out
Right.
one thing.
Yeah.
Boy,
All right, anything else? One thing, I guess, Luttrell and I've been doing right much talking about it. I know Jimmy has too. We've been talking with software, trying to get school and the county on the same page all the time, so it matches right up. And also, any changes in software that we need to be doing now, try to get ahead of the ball. We don't want to be caught. So I don't know what your thoughts are on to it.
I mean, we all have the same system. We all have RDA.
Right.
But,
How much longer is it going to be available? What, are there any other modules that we need to add to it?
I mean, RDA, that's,
We can get additional modules. There comes with a quote, and then you tell them what you want. We get a quote. The quotes that we've gotten in the past, I will tell you, they're not cheap. And that's to add on to our system. Like the one we discussed earlier, I think that quote, we had looked into that when it came up in one of our efficiencies. And we looked at it, the quote came in pretty high, for to add that module. And we could get another quote, because that was last year when we got that quote. But it would, some of the processes that you want to do for the approval, you can't really, it won't allow you to. Our fear was if we let how we wanted to do it is if we hired an additional person in our office to do succession planning, we would take that person and then we would do it that way. If we put it out to a department head, and Luttrell, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it had that capability, but if a pop box comes up that it's over budget, and not saying that nobody would do this, but they have the opportunity to put it to another line item. So then it may not be a true figure what's coming out of that line item because they moved it to a different line item. When I'm actually keying it, if I see that it pops up that they took it out of this line item, I'm going to call in question, why did it come out of this line item? Should it come out of this line item? So that was some concerns there. Not saying that would happen, not at all, but it's just the process of going through them entering it, make sure. And I mean, it's the quote, we can get another quote on that, but it's other modules, like there's a treasury module 2, there's so many, I mean, they have different modules that if you want us to look into, we can look into them.
Do you stamp and approve all the invoices? Do the department heads stamp?
Department heads have a cover sheet that comes in with their stamp of approval on it, or they sign off on the cover sheet with all their invoices listed. The ones that come through our office, like the regular Dominions, the waste managements and stuff like that, that are normal, I do those, get approval on them, and any ones out of the ordinary, like the board approves, or anything that is purchased that y'all have approved or anything, the approval goes on it, electoral does the approval. So everything comes through with an approval on it. The department heads do all their own approvals. So there is other modules, but you want us to look at another software? I don't have a problem with change.
Just looking at, I guess we're looking to try to make things easier for everybody. Make it easier. Less time, I don't know.
Efficiency? Efficiency?
Yeah, efficiency, you know.
Checks and
yeah.
balances?
Yeah. You know,
Well, Pam, did you check into,
things
y'all
are
checked into
changing
the
so much
bridging?
here today. You know, what you buy software today and that's outdated tomorrow is almost that bad. But,
Well, I thought with the RDA system that the person that y'all dealt with don't know how much longer they're gonna.
No.
No, the RDA is separate from our Daveware.
Okay.
Daveware
Okay,
is the
that's
one that is a single entity, a gentleman that runs that. And that has been a conversation that we've had, and we've gotten some estimates on some software, but that includes more than just the treasurer's office. That includes commissioner revenue, that includes building and zoning, that includes multiple offices. And we have been reaching out to some other vendors as far as building permitting software and those types of things. So it's on our radar. We are looking at those things. It's just, we don't want to abruptly end our contract with Dave Zender because we are going to need his assistance in transitioning over to the new platforms.
And that's not gonna be easier for our office because Daveware does everything. Your building permits, your dog tags, your fund accounts, your real estate taxes, your personal property taxes. When you go to another software, you're gonna have to do multiple softwares because RDA, I don't believe, does building permits. So, I mean, you're gonna have multiple softwares and not just the one like we have now.
well, I don't know if that would be the ideal way to be.
And the other key thing
You know,
is.
I think one software company, or whatever you want to call it,
That's why
handle-
we're hesitant on changing.
to handle everything.
And Dave makes it for us. It's not just built to anybody that wants to use it. So you've got cities, towns, counties, all in the one program, and it could be stuff in those other softwares that we don't need.
But if he's gonna retire in the near future,
Well, I'm sure he will, but
Yeah.
I mean, he hasn't told us that.
That's right.
I hope he doesn't retire for ages. He'll stay,
Same,
but, you know, you never know. Anything in the world could happen.
yeah.
And I think that one of the challenges that you're going to run into is that some of the software platforms are good in one area, but not good in, like, building permits. Like Tyler Munis may be good in treasurer's office, but as far as the building permit side, it's not going to be that well suited for them. And I'm just using that as an example. I don't know. But I think it's something that we've started evaluating, and we just need some more time to do our due diligence in looking at these software packages.
And some of the ones we've looked at don't have anyone fully on it yet, so you don't want to be someone's guinea pig. You want somebody that's already using it that you can ask questions to and see how the system's running.
Guinea pig's not the way to be.
And also to think about if we change accounting systems, that doesn't mean the school is, because we're separate contracts.
Yeah, we're separate, yeah.
And separate systems. So then we wouldn't be running same systems.
Right.
So that's another consideration. They would probably, I don't know what they would do, but they're on a totally different system than what they're still on RDA, but theirs is set up differently, but it still puts the financial management stuff in there to get the financial management reports.
And we looked into the bridging, and we didn't see where it would really benefit us. We don't want to be able to change anything on their side, and we don't want them to be able to change anything on our side. I mean.
Yeah, that was one of the comments tonight, that we hadn't looked into it, and I know we had looked into it.
Yeah, we looked into it, and we were, I don't know. We didn't see where it benefit us.
No benefit, what's use? That's basically the way I look at things. I have to see some benefit.
The ones that we talked to, they would say, well, we start this, and then the treasurer's office finishes it. Well, we don't want to do that. We want to do our work, and they do their work.
It's nice when both come in and they balance right out.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, you have any more questions? Ms. King, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight, too. Thank you, too, Gail. Gentlemen, any more questions? Anything? Tadlock, you need us for anything?
No, I had just put a budget, proposed budget calendar in the board docs.
Let's look at that.
And the only other thing is, we had the Joint Finance Committee scheduled twice, and we had to postpone that, so I don't know if there's a specific date you all wish to hold that meeting.
All right, what's your pleasure? When do you want to set one up, or if you do?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, we need to.
All right, when do you want to set it up?
First week of February.
First week of February. All right, what day you want to put it on? Try not to do it Monday and Tuesday.
Do it
How
Wednesday.
about Wednesday? How about Wednesday?
Wednesday the 5th.
I'll make Wednesday work.
Okay, let's do the 5th.
Wednesday the 5th.
What
That'd be the
time?
5th.
Time, Mr. Chairman?
10 o'clock, you say?
I don't care. It's up to you. Is that at morning or at night?
At night be all right, won't it?
I'll
For
be here.
y'all, for y'all.
Y'all be here by yourself.
That's right, you're right, you're right about that.
We normally do 5:30, don't we?
5:30 is when we've been doing it. That's all right with everybody?
We're at 5 today.
Yeah, we're at 5 today, but normally those meetings were 5:30, but it
5:30.
doesn't make it a difference.
No, 5:30 is all right.
All right, 5:30,
What's that date?
February the 5th.
Is that joint finance or the joint school board, board of supervisors?
This is joint finance.
Joint finance.
I was referring to the joint finance. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Mr. Brand and Mr. Haney would be the representatives on that, but, I mean, it's open to anybody.
Open to everybody. All right, is that all right?
I've got it down.
5:30 on the 5th.
5:30 on the 5th.
Mr. Haney,
Yes, sir.
we had comments tonight from the gentleman online. I'd like to know if any of these people over here will have any comments to us tonight. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, we can let them have comments. In the presentation, the presentation was a presentation to the board. The public was here to listen. The public was not here to comment at that time.
Correct.
And that's the way that was set up.
That's the way it was supposed to be.
That's where it was supposed to be, but it got out of hand. All right. Any comments tonight? Public comment period? We don't have it on agenda, but I'll give everybody one.
Well, you know, I can't, I'll be here. Karen Pica, I live over in Wacomico Church. Just, I want to say thank you. Thank you for taking the time. I know this took a little bit of time. Mr. Johnson here was also instrumental in getting that started. It took over a year. It took a lot of work. There's a tremendous amount of information in that document, and as the co-chair of the Joint Finance Committee, I make myself available to help put together any corrective action plan or any other information that may be useful to help get the county where it wants to be. As a wise person said yesterday, all problems are solvable. It just sometimes takes a little time and elbow grease. So thank you for keeping this forefront. The finances in this county can't be managed without everyone in this room, and I, for one, don't want my taxes to go up any more than they have to. 0 would be nice, but I appreciate that might change. So thank you for all your dedication and time.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
On the fix-it plan, we used to do these things quite a bit. It's okay if something has already been solved. It still belongs in the plan. You need to document that it was already fixed. Don't leave it out just because someone says it's already fixed. It has to be in there. And I know that that's what the gentleman earlier was trying to get a nitnoid on, but just make sure that everything that was in the suggestions to get everything healed is addressed, positively or negatively. Doesn't matter if it's already fixed today. When you get the thing together, it needs to be in the list. And another point, what I used to do in my real career was design systems of systems, from where the cable goes into the back of the computer to where the services were provided, everything. And as Karen wants to make herself available, I can make myself available to help put together an integrated package that everybody can be comfortable with. That's what I do.
All right, thank you. Keep you in mind. Keep both of y'all in mind. All right, anyone else?
I have,
I'll let the ones in here, we'll take 1 or 2 offline if you have something, when I'm not going to be insulted. All right. Take comments.
this is Dave Curran. I'm a doctorate. I sit on the school board. I agree with Karen Pica and the last gentleman that spoke. I think we need to look at the way we do business, but I don't agree with blaming anybody. I think there's been a remarkable difference in how the school board, and granted, I've only been on the school board for a year and a half, but there's been a remarkable difference in how the school board is addressing issues. I think there was some serious problems before we got here. And I just want the Board of Supervisors to know that I don't think this audit was a bad idea. I think it was a great idea. I don't want the Board of Supervisors to misconstrue what I had to say, but I think we need to move forward, and I think we need people like Ms. Pica and the last gentleman, and I'm sorry I did not get your name, to look at the way we do business and how we address problems in the community. And I'm a firm believer in I think my computer just died, but I'm a firm believer in. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
we can still hear you.
I'm a firm believer in holding the school board accountable, but there's a lot of discussion tonight about like what happened before 2023 and what I understand, and Mr. Chairman and members of the board, um, who's responsible for this change? Who's responsible for the problem that happened, and how do we fix it? And that's what I would really like. And Karen, I'm going to address this to you, and because I respect your opinion, and I want to know, do you want to work with me and we can work together as a team to like address these issues and make this a better county? Because that's the only reason I ran for the school board, and I think that's the only reason that the board of supervisors run for their positions, is we want to make this a better county. So um, I'm open. My phone is available. I'm going to tell everybody that um, I'm here. I'm listening, and I agree with a lot of the stuff that was said tonight in terms of going forward in the future. But I also want to make sure that we do it without pointing fingers or like accusing people of doing something wrong. I remember a year ago when we sat here that there was $200,000 missing or something missing, and there was a lot of improprieties based on the school board, and like they didn't follow through, and there was money missing, and I don't see that in this report, and as a result, I just want to work with everybody, and I just want to make sure that we work as a team. I don't care what happened in the future or in the past, but I want the future to move forward, and I just want you guys to know that I appreciate where you're coming from. I appreciate what was done, and I want to move forward.
All right, thank you, sir. Anyone else online that wants to speak?
What's his name?
David Kern. Anyone else? Anyone else like to speak that's online? All right, thank you. Public comments closed. Did everyone have a chance to look at the budget calendar? Look appropriate to everybody? Doable?
I forgot about it that quick.
I think
And that's just a draft. I mean, those dates may get
yeah,
modified as we go through the
it's
the
nothing
process.
set in stone.
You said it was,
But just try to have a goal on something.
you said it was in board docs.
Huh?
You said it was in board docs on email.
It's in
Board
board
docs.
docs.
Some of those dates are behind us. Has everyone met those dates?
I just went on and showed everything, what we've done to date as well. So, again, the actual budget proposals from the departments were due January 3rd. So, majority of everybody has submitted those.
Attachment in here, so.
All right,
You don't, I can email it to you.
it's in board docs, Brent, yeah. It's in board docs.
Yeah,
isn't it?
I see it, FY '26 budget, but I don't have an attachment
Oh,
in it.
you don't have attachment? You on this year's or last year's?
This year's, Richard.
I'm sorry. I had to get you tonight. All right. You have anything else, Mr. Tadlock? Nothing else on your agenda?
That's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank everyone for coming.